Oh, hello everybody. I am Chris, aka Godless Journey, and with me today is David, aka Graceful Atheist.
How's it going?
And um, we kind of started this because we were both looking for kind of a community sense that we've both lost since leaving church, and thought this might be a good way to kind of get things rolling. Peace out because it's driving me crazy. And we've so far, last time we discussed David's blog post about deconversion, and today we'll be talking about one of my blog posts about naturalism.
A simple topic.
Super simple topic.
Yeah.
And I wrote this blog post because I had an interaction with somebody on one of good old Ken Ham's tweets, and we went back and forth for a while. And he's like, "Well, are you a naturalist?" I'm like, "Don't know what that means." So I did a quick Google search and looked it up, and I'm like, "Sure, I ascribe to the possibility of everything having only a natural process, and why not?" So he then responded with this article saying, the title of which was "The Three M's That Naturalism Can't," let's say, basically can't account for, can't explain.
Yeah, there you go. There you
go. And the 3 points it made were mind, morality, and meaning. And I am just a regular Joe. Not a philosophizer or any kind of scholarly person, but I figured I would take a stab at doing a rebuttal, and I said that I would, and it took me a couple months, but I finally did. Sent him a response with no response, but that's fine. I did it more for me anyway.
Yeah. What do you think you learned the most? What was the most significant for you?
I think that the biggest piece that stood out for me was the piece on meaning, and I immediately kind of snapped right to that because that was one of the first questions I had after I left Christianity was, so what am I supposed to do now? I mean, I had this quote unquote grand purpose that I am supposed to serve God and do all these things for God, and now there's no God. So that one resounded with me pretty well. My hair's a mess. But yeah, I think that I mean, it's a little bit of research while I was doing through these, not a whole lot, but most of it was just kind of my initial response to the problem addressed.
Yeah, I like there is kind of a distinction between what's called metaphysical naturalism, which is really a positive claim. It's a positive claim saying that all there is to the cosmos is natural processes. In effect, a part of materialism, right? An implication of materialism. Mm-hmm. And I consider myself a metaphysical naturalist. But what I find interesting is the position that science takes is what's called methodological naturalism. And effectively, all it does is it says the null hypothesis is nature is all there is. It's not making a real positive claim there. It just makes that assumption. And then science has been just wildly, fantastically successful based on that assumption, basically assuming that there are no supernatural forces that affect the phenomena that we see. So I find when you're talking with theists, sometimes the easier position to talk about is methodological naturalism, to say, again, the fact that, Chris, you and I are talking live with video and people are watching us live and people can watch us after the fact is an attest to the success of the assumption of naturalism and a methodological naturalism in science.
Sure. I saw a meme recently that kind of goes along with that. It was a list of things that science has accomplished, getting rid of polio and computers, and on the right-hand side, this list of things that faith has accomplished, and it was empty.
Yeah.
Made me chuckle. But Yeah, I think that I like to do thought experiments. So even the idea of the simulation theory, I think is a fun thing to think about. That there isn't anything necessarily real. We're just possibly just brains in a vat, or just. I think that's kind of cool to think about. Obviously, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with life. I have to live it assuming that this is reality.
Right.
So with that assumption, yeah, I think that the like you were saying, the metaphysical naturalism definitely fits better with how I see things.
Yeah. Yeah. Sean Carroll is the famous physicist. He just recently wrote or was pushing his book, The Big Picture. And in that book, he talks about what he calls poetic naturalism, and which is even, I think, a more kind of down to earth perspective. What he's basically saying is, you know, if we look at it from hard science, things like determinism and whether or not free will exists, and all these very complex questions, one of which we'll get to when we talk about the mind and consciousness. Uh, the hard answers might be there from a scientific perspective, but what you just said, how we live our daily lives, is kind of more poetic, right? We talk about doing things from the heart, or
Yeah,
something about our souls. We use this language that describes kind of who I am as a person, and basically he's saying, there shouldn't be any problem with using that kind of language in everyday use. And so this idea of poetic naturalism, that science informs us, but we still live at this kind of at our conscious level, and we relate to each other as conscious beings, and we're not constantly trying to look at what is the wave function of that describes me, right? Like that just isn't a part of our daily experience.
yeah, exactly. Right. Well, let's kind of dig in here.
Sure.
First point he brought up was the mind. I assume he meant consciousness. He didn't really state that outright in his article. In my post, there is a link to the original article that I was responding to. So read that. You're more than welcome to. But and his main point was, if we are just physical processes, we don't have free will. And to which I said, so what? I mean, if free will is an illusion, what's the difference? I mean, it's not going to change how I live my life. And even from a theistic standpoint, if there's no free will, then God made me an atheist.
Right.
Especially if you get into like Calvinism and predetermination and all that stuff.
Right.
And one thing I neglected to bring up in my article, which I did look up, how did we arrive at this consciousness? And well, there was something about 10,000 years ago called the Neolithic Revolution, which changed us as a species from hunters and gatherers, nomads, having to wander around thinking about moment to moment survival, to suddenly our brains having all this free time since we're sitting here growing our food and not having to search for it. And I think I didn't dig too deeply into this, but it makes sense that now that this sudden openness in our mind was there, we were able to fill it with different processes and kind of raise the bar for ourselves. I don't know if you've looked into that or not.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think that art and science and many of these things, we've been freed up from just the day-to-day survival to be able to think deeply about things and come up with the body of knowledge that humanity has, which is fantastic. So yeah.
Yeah.
I think this guy is an apologist, right? He claims to have been an atheist and felt like he couldn't explain his daily experience with naturalistic terms. So I'm going to quote. I have a couple of quotes from him. So on the mind, he says, "The problem of the mind, as philosophers and researchers commonly describe it, is only a problem because the material limitations of naturalism strain to account for immaterial consciousness. And so what I want to acknowledge here is that these are difficult problems, right? So it's not that there are simplistic answers to the things that we're talking about here. I obviously disagree with this person deeply. I think that we are physical beings, that we are, that our mind is an emergent property of synapses firing. I also agree, however, that we can't explain it yet. I don't think anyone understands consciousness at
Sure,
all.
but then he's just, using the God of the gaps fallacy. We don't know
Precisely.
yet, but I mean, that gap keeps smaller and smaller every day.
Exactly. This fits very nicely into the God of the gaps. That he's basically saying, we can't explain this, and so therefore God.
Right. Yeah, and that's an argument. That's how I held my cognitive dissonance for so long. It's like, well, we don't have an answer. This is some sort of answer. It's better than no answer, right?
Yeah.
But looking back now, that's not a good argument.
Right. On the mind being physical, I think I wrote about in one of my blog posts. If you take certain medications, you might go unconscious. If you're anesthetized during surgery, you go into a deep state of unconsciousness. When we go to sleep, we go to a lighter level of unconsciousness. But all of these things we experience in our regular lives are really showing us that our mind is in fact physical. And as kind of a joke, please don't actually do this. If you doubt this, take a hammer, smack yourself on the head as hard as you can, and see what happens. But there's been many studies of people that have had brain injuries where they come out the other side with dramatic personality changes. Who they would define themselves has changed after a physical change to their brain.
Yeah, I've seen some studies done where people develop an accent after brain surgery from someplace they've never lived their whole life.
Yeah. I think too, again, because we can't explain this, because it feels like an emergent property, people want to reject a naturalistic claim. And again, I want to acknowledge it's a complex problem that neuroscience is still really at the beginning of. But again, to use Sean Carroll a little bit, he gives the example as far as emergence is concerned. Let's talk about the phases of water. Right, water is H2O, and below that level, we can talk about quantum field theory and express it that way. But how we experience it at our macroscopic level is we can see water go from a liquid to a gas or a solid, and all of those things are H2O, and below that it's still quantum wave theory, and yet these emergent properties come out. So in similarity, we have very complex brain with billions of synapses firing and the connections that are built as we grow, and it is hand wavy, but somehow that develops our self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's weird how we sometimes think about it. It's like sometimes we're very self-aware and sometimes we're on autopilot where we're just kind of going through the motions of the day.
Absolutely.
And that train of thought just left me where I was going with that. But
there's an example. So yeah, I think one of the interesting implications is people, I've been listening lately to like Sam Harris and others talking about consciousness, and what does that imply for other animals, like other mammals that have some level of consciousness? I find this just deeply fascinating, like that we can't explain, we understand that a social animal like a dolphin or wolves or elephants have some sense, especially elephants and dolphins have some sense of self-awareness and have so complex social interactions, and yet we can't explain at all to what level they are conscious, or what do they have thoughts, how do they, all those things are just deep mysteries to us. And even ourselves, obviously we know we are thinking creatures, but we can't yet describe exactly how and why on a scientific level.
Yeah. But we'll get there.
Yep, absolutely.
We've done it before. All right. Well, next he talked about morality. I know that I remember in college, I took an ethics class. I don't like necessarily the word morality. It's a weird concept that's kind of loosely defined. But ethics, I feel, is similar enough to get the same point across. And I remember I was super deep into my Christianity at that point, and I found the topic fascinating at only a thought experiment level. I never really looked into applications of it outside of an academic stance,
right?
Which is a shame, because there is so much to talk about with it. It's kind of a segue. I'm watching this show on NBC called The Good Place. NBC, if you're watching, I expect my royalty check. But it's about what happens after you die, and one of the people there is not supposed to be there. She was a bad person, but there was a mix-up, and the whole show is one of the other people there happened to be an ethics professor, and he's teaching her all this stuff on ethics and Kant's view and a utilitarian view, and I'm like firing. I'm like, I remember that.
Right.
But anyway, that's a whole segue. But the one thing that ethics is. It's where I get that from is my empathy for other people. I often hear that all the time. Atheists have no ethics. If there's no God, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, not really. I'm still accountable to all of the people around me. What I do has an effect on every person I touch, and then goes out from that.
Right.
It's the butterfly effect. You change one little thing, and it just is this huge scoping ripple of effect. So I base my decisions on whether something is ethical or not on that, which I think is harder in a sense, because there's no black and white book to tell me this is right, this is wrong.
Right.
But on the same token, I put in my article about, if you were in 1940s Germany and there was the SS at your door saying, are you hiding any Jews? If you're living by that black and white book, there's no good answer to that, because either you lie or you're responsible for killing a family.
Right.
It's an easier decision for me in that case, because it's like, I'm going to lie. I will lie all day long about that. There's nobody here. Right. But as far as how did that emerge? We're a social species. We have to interact with each other, and if we don't learn empathy, we get cast aside. You aren't welcome in this culture, and eventually your genes are going to disappear, because that's not what people want. Sure, there's mutations and there's problems everywhere, but that's kind of how I see morality as a naturalistic process. It is selective, because our groups, our clans, our tribes, or whatever, are going to not want to reproduce with us if we're not playing with the same deck of cards.
Right. Yeah, I think for sure that morality developed as our social bonds grew larger and larger and larger. You start with a small family group, and there still has to be some sense of morality and empathy that dictates how you treat each other. And then you've got a tribe that's got, several groups of families, and they have to, even more complex relationships, and that just continues to grow exponentially to where we are today. In an ever increasing world due to technology, where we, literally have instantaneous connectivity to anyone in the world, that has deep implications for the moral decisions that we make. And yet, kind of piggybacking on what you're saying, we are responsible for developing that sense of morality. We can't. I think counterintuitively or ironically, theists who say, well, God dictates morality, maybe have less of a sense of accountability to the rest of humanity, because they have
Right.
they are directly accountable in their minds to God. Whereas from a naturalistic point of view, our accountability is to the human race, and to our immediate families, to our social groups, our cities, what have you. We have a deeper sense of that interconnectedness, and what I do affects you, and vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. It's bigger than ourselves, and that I think what a lot of theists have a hard time with is there's no quote unquote ultimate judgment, that when we die we're done. Well, they think that there's a whole nother level of punishment that comes if you don't do things the right way.
Right.
But that leaves you open to the scenario if someone rapes somebody else, and at that last minute that rapist has a deathbed conversion, all of a sudden they're in heaven. Where's the justice in that? That seems like a huge loophole, and that angers me more than when we're dead, we're dead.
Yeah, there's definitely, again, I think because they feel like God is the only one who counts.
Yeah.
There's no sense of the impact that my actions have on another human being, especially in the cases of something as repugnant as rape, right?
Yeah.
Like this it's just terrible. So,
I don't want to get angry. I'm going to get angry if I keep talking about rape.
Can I quote our apologist friend here?
Absolutely. As long as it's not about rape.
If naturalism is true, morality is nothing more than a matter of opinion. All of us as humans have simply come to embrace those cultural or personal mores that best promote the survival of the species. There is no transcendent, objective moral truth. And what I want to set here is that I think my personal opinion is that there certainly isn't a transcendent objective moral truth. I'm not certain there is an objective moral truth in the way that he intends that. But I don't think that implies that we can't compare, say, culture to culture, right? I think, so Sam Harris comes up with, the avoidance of unnecessary suffering for conscious beings. That's a really interesting way to look at things. Utilitarianism, consequentialism, what have you. I think all moral systems are incomplete. They are hinting at something they're all pointing at something that we need to continue to figure out. But my point here is that there are ways to compare one moral system versus another, and make value judgments based on those comparisons. So regardless of the fact that there is, and again, I certainly don't think there's a transcendent one, but an objective moral truth, period, that doesn't preclude other measuring sticks that we can use in an objective way to compare moral systems.
Sure. Another thing that always comes up when they talk about objective truths, an objective truth has to be something that's true whether or not anyone is there to make a judgment on that.
Right.
Human interactions by nature have to have someone there to make a judgment on that.
Right.
So I don't necessarily think there can be objective truth in that, because someone's got to judge it.
Yeah.
I mean, a rock is a rock is a rock, whether or not someone's there to ascribe the word rock to it, it is
Right.
still there.
Yeah, and one other thing that morality means for me, the evolutionary psychology teaches us a lot about, why we do some of the things that we do, and it feels to me like much of morality or ethics is basically overcoming, it's superseding what evolution would have us do, right?
Yeah.
So from an evolutionary point of view, please don't quote me here out of context. From an evolutionary point of view, rape makes some sense, right?
Right.
Again, please.
No, I understand what you're
I know
saying.
you don't. I mean, people watching. The context is this is bad.
Cut that little snippet out. And,
yes, exactly. Yeah.
This is an atheist.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but clearly, we have grown the morality to say, no, that's repugnant. It's abhorrent. It injures. It hurts a person, not just physically but emotionally, and to the deepest part of their person, right? And so therefore it is morally wrong, it is ethically wrong on one of the deepest levels possible. And so I just use that as a simple illustration of evolution has given us a start. It like you mentioned, maybe some group selection things, to the extent that group selection is a thing, but more importantly, as morality does progress as a society, we agree together, we hash out, we work out, a progression of morality that is so far beyond just what evolution would teach us. And to my mind, in many ways, the purpose of morality is overcoming what evolution, what our instincts, what our animal instincts would have us do.
Yeah. I agree. All right.
Can we move on?
I think so. Last thing that he brought up was the idea of meaning. And like I said, when I first saw that kind of hit home for me. And that without a spiritual aspect of it, there is no real meaning in life, and you could just play video games all day and it wouldn't matter. And I mean, to that end, it's kind of true. I mean, there isn't a bigger meaning with a naturalistic worldview because our meanings are ascribed by us. The video game thing, he harped on it. I'm like, so what? If you can make money playing video games all day, more power to you.
Right.
There's some big money to be made in the competitive video game world. That's not for me. I will work my 9-to-5 job and relax with video games. That's kind of how I responded. It's like, hey, if you can get a job playing video games, you can live with that. Go ahead. If you don't like how your life is, you're living in a crappy apartment or whatever, or still living in your parents' house, then your meaning is changing. Your meaning is now, I want to improve my life. And to do that, I have to get a job I don't like. So what? That's how it is.
Right. What I think is interesting here is that human beings are in fact meaning makers, right? So the natural perspective of the cosmos does in fact say there is no meaning in the cosmos, right? It is the forces of blind nature that brings us here today. But when human beings became conscious, when we became human beings, Homo sapiens, or whatever stages that leading up to that, and we could ask questions of ourselves and of the cosmos of what does it mean to be human, and to derive meaning from our lives and from our relationships. We are ultimately, as far as we know, the only meaning makers in the cosmos. And so that flips back on itself, and it makes us, in the one sense, we're not unique. We are just atoms interacting in the cosmos. And on the other side, we are painfully unique in the cosmos, and
Yeah.
that gives us meaning. You and I being able to have a conversation, just thinking our thoughts, is so rare in the cosmos that it is precious, and that's how I derive my meaning. Is that the relationships I have with my family, with my friends, being able to just think my thoughts, whether I'm thinking it in my head or writing it down on my blog or talking with friends. That gives me great meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. And another interesting aspect is humans are exceptional pattern recognition beings. I mean, so much so that we see patterns that don't even exist because
Right.
it's what our brain does. You see the rocks on Mars and there's a face,
Right.
that type of thing. I mean, that was definitely a benefit to us when we were hunting animals, was that, movement I saw out of the corner of my eye. Was that a lion or was it just the wind?
Right.
If you've got the pattern recognition to think that might be a lion, you're going to live if it is a lion, and if it's not a lion, you're still going to live because
Yeah.
it was just the wind.
The hyper agent detector. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. Let's quote my our friend here. If naturalism is true, life's meaning and purpose are simply in the eye of the beholder. As a naturalist, you are inventing your own meaning as well. Purpose and significance, from a purely naturalistic perspective, are nothing more than opinion and personal preference. So, again, what I wanted to acknowledge from him is that I think this is one of the bigger challenges for people that go through a deconversion process, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a theist, whichever brand of theism you subscribe to, you are handed, a sense of meaning to you, and it takes very little thought on your part to consume that. As an atheist, as a naturalist, the where you derive meaning and how you do so are really all in your hands. And I find this is maybe the most difficult part of the transition of deconversion is not just falling into depression, right? Like it could be very easy to slip into a nihilistic view of there's no meaning in life and why bother. And I don't think that's true, but I think it could be easy for people to slip into that.
Yeah. I definitely, when I first deconverted, I had that for a while, and it was hard to get out of bed in the morning, and I actually, eventually saw help on it, and was able to kind of move through it, thankfully. And it's a scary place to be. I mean, especially with, you knew exactly what you were here for so long, and now you have to figure that out all over again.
Right.
And you have to figure it out. No one's going to give it to you on a silver platter.
Exactly.
It needs to be an internal, struggle.
Right. Right. And again, for me, I think we derive the most meaning from our relationships with one another. We have the great privilege of interacting with other fully autonomous, conscious beings.
Yeah.
And so the relationship that we thought we had with God is actually much deeper, richer, and more complex with other human beings. What we have to cope with is that other human beings have their own wants, wishes, desires, senses of meaning, and it's that and that goes back to morality. How do we hash out? How do we agree with each other? How do we live with each other? That kind of thing. But I think I try not to be too sappy here, but the love that we have for one another, outside of the religious context, is actually one of the most deeply meaningful things in the world.
Yeah, that's very true. I remember once I kind of came out of my funk, I had a different outlook at my family, even,
Right.
My wife and kids. It was I only have a limited time with them. I need to make it count.
Yeah.
There's no more, oh, after we die, we'll all be together again, and it'll be hunky dory. There's no more of that. This is it.
Right. And again, I think that's another counterintuitive aspect that the theists can't even begin to comprehend how not having an eternal life after death could be meaningful, and yet the opposite is true. Every moment is poignant because we know there's an end, and so the time we have with our families. I have youngish children, and so my time with them, they're going to grow up and leave at some point in time, and so my time with them is deeply precious.
Yeah.
And being aware of that fact, that my life is finite and their life is finite, and there are no guarantees. That makes me more conscious, actively conscious of the preciousness of that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I hug them a little tighter every day.
Yeah, I hear you. I think we talked on the previous episode. For me, humanism encapsulates a lot of this. Gives kind of a naturalistic reason for morality. Gives a naturalistic reason for meaning. For me, and humanism has been around a long time. It's been a part of religions for some time as well. It's just basically the acknowledgement that human beings are important, and the care and thriving of human beings is the highest priority.
Yep.
I like to say, people are more important than ideology, always.
100%. 100%. I'm still kind of looking around at I don't like labeling. I mean, I had a label for 20 years. I don't necessarily want to have a label anymore. But yeah, I definitely align myself more with humanism than most other things I've seen so far.
Right. Yeah, maybe that'll be a future discussion. We can talk about atheism plus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
You have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think so. Maybe just if we can restate that we were Chris and I we're hoping that this could grow into something beyond just two dudes talking to each other. So if you are interested in joining us in the next coming weeks, you can direct message either Godless Journey or Graceful Atheist on Twitter. Our blogs are available. You can get in contact with us in a myriad of ways, and we'd like to have other people join. And maybe eventually grow this into more of a community.
Well said. All right. Well, that's all I have. I think we're.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks. It was a great talk.
Absolutely. All right. We'll catch you next time.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye.